Hey there, Ghost Jazz Trio fans. James Morgan here. Hope everyone's having a great Sunday. Today is Mother's Day. Hope everyone's enjoying it. And I thought I'd go ahead and make a video. I've been getting some messages, receiving messages about inquiring about my musical background and things like that. Just to give you an update, I just came out with my fourth album under the Ghost Jazz Trio brand. And it's my fourth album in 4 years, produced by legendary guitarist Dean Brown. He used to play with Billy Cobham and many other musicians. He's been on over 200 plus albums, so it was great to have him producing my fourth album, which is called Groove and Smooth, and it has 10 songs on there. All the songs most of the songs, many of the songs were written, composed by myself and Dean Brown, uh, James Morgan and Dean Brown. And a couple of songs were just composed by myself and one with the keyboardist, Chase Pato. Um, and then Dean also plays on the album, which is really nice. And on the album is Trace Hodgins on drums, great local drummer, and also Nathan Brown, who plays with Coco Montoya and many other musicians, Eric Marienthal, and does a lot of the smooth jazz cruises and plays a lot around town. And drummer, again, Trace Hodgins, and then Chase Pato on keyboards, piano. He's actually, this is the third album he's on. My first album was Invisible Time, and that had acoustic bass, drums, and guitar. And then the second album was called On the Level, and Nathan Brown came in on that album. And then special guest featuring Patrick Yondahl, guitarist, has over 27 albums to his credit. And also a sax player from the East Coast, had him on one of the songs. And then the third album, which was called Dreams Above, which came out in 2022. That was a concept where I wanted to combine strings with kind of symphonic sound with smooth contemporary jazz. And so that was real nice. I had a really good sax player on there. And so that was a really good album. Nathan Brown, again, Chase Pato were on the album, and again, a really good sax player on there. And then on the fourth album, just released March 24th, 2023, Groove and Smooth, all the same personnel, and all the albums were mastered and recorded by Alan Sanderson, who's a Grammy award-winning engineer. He's worked with Elton John and Rolling Stones and Michael Jackson, many others. So this video is really to kind of give people who've been inquiring through YouTube and Facebook and social media a little bit about my background, since I've kind of sprung up in the last 4 years out of nowhere. And all three of the first three albums have all been nominated for Best Jazz Album of the Year by the San Diego Music Awards. They've all debuted in the top 100 smooth jazz charts. Currently, the album is at number 25 in the smooth jazz charts in the top 100. And it's number 2 in the jazz charts. If you go to Roots Report, Music Report, you'll see it listed there, the album. And the new single, the second single out right now, which is called The Sound of Wood, is doing really well. And On the Groove was the first single. And both of those were actually in the listeners' charts since they both came out, and both songs in the top 50 listener charts the whole time. So that's been great. So I've had a lot of success in a short amount of time. And again, no one really had heard of myself, James Morgan, or the band Ghost Jazz Trio, based in San Diego. And really, the popularity and the growth came through a very aggressive online marketing by myself and then my marketing partner, which is smoothjazz.com global radio. And they've been really helpful, advised me a lot of stuff. So that's really brought the album to, where it needs to be. Hold on a second. And yeah, so, and I'm also looking to expand the audience base, fan base. Smooth jazz, the term is the demographic is 55 and older, semi-retired, which is a great audience. They go to all the festivals. They really like the music. And the music I tried to create was a little different than the typical kind of R&B, blues, phrasings, and musical compositions because of my jazz fusion background. So I try to create my own sound within that genre. And I think that really helped because I didn't just sound like all the other jazz guitarists, and all the compositions don't have that kind of generic smooth jazz sound. Like some of the unique sounding ones, like Bob James is very unique, and um, a bunch of other ones, too many to name. But yeah, so I thought I would make the video again, kind of give you a little background. So I started playing guitar actually when I was around 15, actually a little younger. My dad had bought me a Silvertone, a Sears Silvertone guitar, came in a cardboard box. And so I was, always kind of fooling around with that, playing it, never really took lessons. And then around 15 years old, I got a nice Yamaha acoustic guitar, and I would go camping by myself up in Arroyo Seco. This is up in Northern California. Was raised kind of in the Carmel, Santa Cruz, Monterey Bay area. And I'd go out and camp out for 2 or 3 days by a river somewhere, and take my guitar and play, and just enjoy myself. And of course, back then everyone was smoking weed, so I'd smoke some weed and play. And anyway, so through high school, I kind of played guitar, and then I got an electric guitar. I got I guess around, I say 1974. I bought an electric guitar because my brother had brought over an album called Hymn to the Seventh Galaxy by Return to Forever, Chick Corea, Return to Forever. It had Bill Connors and Chick Corea, Stanley Clarke, Lenny White. And I never even heard that kind of music before. I was listening to Led Zeppelin and The Who, and it was junior high school. And so my brother brought that album over, and I heard Bill Connors on that album, and just the music just resonated with me. It was like, I love this. I would love to do this. So I got the album and bought it myself, the record, vinyl, and went out and bought an electric guitar, and I got a gold top Les Paul, but that had laminated white paint over it. So I had this all white Les Paul guitar, weighed a lot. I mean, it must have been weighed 25 pounds. And so I would play with the record every day. I would play with that record and just listen to it and play. And I had a little amplifier, and then I would get together with my friends, high school friends, Rocky on guitar or drums, and then my friend Randy, he played guitar. He was very good, and we'd jam and all the time at each other's houses. And then we started getting jam sessions together through the years at a place called the Unitarian Church. One of the musicians' mom belonged to it, and we got the key. We'd go there at night when it was closed and play all night. So that was a lot of fun. We started doing, and then Stanley Clarke came out with his album, and so we started doing songs off of his album. And I had to learn it from the record because I didn't really read music. And so you just listen to the record over and over. So years went by, and then one day I was up in Berkeley at a place called Leopold's Records. It was very popular back in the day, and they had a jazz section in the back. And so I went back there immediately to look, and I had driven up from Santa Cruz And so I went and opened up the door, and as I opened the door, the wind kind of blew a piece of paper up over the on the wall next to me. And I thought I saw an index card there with the name Bill Connors on it. And I kind of looked, and the paper went back down. So I lifted it up, and lo and behold, said Bill Connors giving guitar lessons. I was like, oh, wow, Bill Connors, Chick Corea, returned to forever. And he had left since then, and Al Di Meola took his place, I guess, and was playing. So I basically just took the index card off the wall, and when I got back to Santa Cruz, lived in a town called Aptos, I wanted to get a hold of him. So I called the number down there, and they said he had moved. And I guess he had a girlfriend at the time, and that was their number that they shared. And she said that he had moved out, and she wasn't sure where he was, but she gave me his parents' phone number. So here I'm, in my late teens, and I have this parents' phone number, and I'm thinking, well, what am I going to do? Call up his parents, say, hi, I want to take lessons from Bill. Yeah, I could have done that. But, I went a little step further. What I did was I called up the parents, and I kind of pretended I was a manager, a band manager. And I said, yeah, I'm trying to get a hold of Bill, kind of lowered my voice, and really have to get in touch with him. And if you could have him call me at this number, my name's James, and gave him the number and the name, and that was it. So, a few weeks went by, and I was up in my room practicing one night, still living at home with my mom, and all of a sudden the phone rings like they did in those days. And all of a sudden I hear my mom yell, hey, Jimmy. She used to call me Jimmy. She goes, BC's on the phone. I'm like, BC? I don't know any BC. So I pick up the phone and upstairs, and I go, hi, who's this? And he goes, hi, this is Bill Connors. And right away I started hyperventilating. Wow, this is Bill Connors, the guy I idolized and listened to for years. And then I kind of was at the top of the stairs. I sit down on the stairs. I go, hi, yeah. He goes, yeah, you called my parents, some management thing or music. I go, yeah, I'm not really a manager. I was just I want to make sure I got a hold of you. And it's kind of hyperventilating. And he could tell I was a little nervous. He goes, oh, so, well, that's fine. He goes, I appreciate your, being aggressive, trying to get a hold of me. He goes, what would you want to talk about? And I said, well, I actually want to take lessons from you, but I'm not sure where you're living. And I had seen a card up there in Berkeley, told him the story. And he says, well, I'm not living in San Francisco anymore, Berkeley area. I'm living in Half Moon Bay. And I go, perfect. I live in Santa Cruz, which is just south, maybe 40 minutes. So I said, well, I'd really like to take lessons from you if I could. And he said, yeah, sure. So come on up. So I said, well, I also have a friend, Randy, who would like to take lessons too, if that'd be great. And he said, yeah, that's fine. He goes, why don't you come up and then, bring him up, and then one person can wait outside while I give a lesson, and the next person, and then so on and so forth. So Randy and I drove up there, and actually the first time I went up by myself, and I was really into John McLaughlin at the time too, because I got really into jazz fusion. I was listening to all McLaughlin's album. I was learning how to play Birds of Fire and Intermounting Flame, and listening to not much Holdsworth at the time. I think he was a Soft Machine maybe at that time, but I was listening to that, Return to Forever, Weather Report a little bit. I was really into John Abercrombie and Larry Correll's 11th House album. And so I was wearing an all-white Indian outfit. I used to wear all the time with my white Les Paul because I was into McLaughlin. He was into Sri Shimnoy. So, which is another story. But anyway, so I went up there and I walk in, I got my all whites on and my guitar, and Bill looks at me, he goes, oh, great, another McLaughlin clone. I was like, oh my God, I was embarrassed. Anyway, so make a long story short, Bill, he was living in a small, I'd say probably a 50 square foot room was in there, and he had a little cot, picture of Segovia on the wall. He had a chair with a little footstool and a music stand with some sheet music and all windows, and then the rest of the house was through another door, and that was basically where he lived. And so I took my lesson from him, and basically, he asked me, he said, "Do you read music?" I said, "No, I was actually in college going to start reading music." And I said, "But I'm going to start at Cabrillo College. I'm going to start learning how to read music." And he said, he says, "That's great," but he goes, "I'm going to be teaching you technique, and I'll teach you a little bit to read, just to learn the finger exercises, to learn different patterns, doing thirds and fourths and different fingering patterns." And I said, "Great." So he gave me some sheet music with the notes, and so I took it home and started learning all the techniques. And he showed me how to hold a pick. He had me make a pick out of coconut shell. So I would get a coconut, crack it open. He told me how to do it. Get a file it down flat, and then find sandpaper. Keep going to grades sandpaper down pretty thick, because the picking technique he taught me was how to bow the string. Most people were flat picking, so they would take the pick and flat pick up and down the string. But when you're doing that, your pick is leaving the string. So there's a millisecond of a moment where your pick is not on the string, which is fine. The string is ringing a little bit, but the way his technique was to bow the string. So you're running the tip of at an angle, the pick back and forth over the string fast, but your pick is not really ever leaving the string. So you're getting the kind of a little bit of a warmer, round sound. And so that was a technique I learned with this coconut pick. I was learning how to bow the string fast, and he would show me how to do that. And then the fingering techniques too. So so that was a really great experience, learning that. And then again, I would take lessons. Eventually, instead of paying him, it was $20 a lesson. So instead of doing that, he wanted me to bring him weed. So he was really into smoking weed. So started bringing that up, and would give him some weed for the lesson. And we one time I went up there, and then he ended up telling me that he was going to Carmel to the um, classical guitar festival, and he was into a guy named Jim Bream, I think his name was. And he wanted to go and see him play. And I said, "Well, my brother lives in Carmel, and we could stay at his place." So he ended up driving from Half Moon Bay a few weeks later, picked me up, and he had a little, I think it was a small Volkswagen Bug. It might even been a Morris Minor. I can't remember. So anyway, we drove down to Carmel and went to my brother's house. My brother was amazed because he used to go see him play with Return to Forever, and here Bill Connors is in his house through his little brother who's taking lessons from him. And Bill and I became friends because we would talk a lot about different things. We'd go hikes, little small hikes around his house there, and climb trees and sit up in the tree, and he'd pass a joint back and forth, and he would tell me stories about Chick Corea, and how when he recorded Him to the Seventh Galaxy, when Chick edited and did all the editing on the album, he took a lot of the guitar parts out that Bill had recorded and put organ instead to replace it. So he was kind of bitter about that. And he had a lot of actual bitterness with the Chick and the whole Return to Forever thing. He said the reason he got out of the band was because Stanley was starting to play bass really loud, because you couldn't hear acoustic bass over the synthesizers and the drums and the electric guitar, which makes sense. They kind of pioneered, Mark Sala and him and others kind of pioneered that louder bass sound, where it became more of a forefront instrument. But I guess it kind of irritated Bill, and he felt like, Stanley, as he said, was trying to become Jimi Hendrix on bass. And so there was a lot of, I could sense a lot of animosity there with Chick Corea and the band and all that. So I guess that's why it didn't work out. And anyway, so we ended up at the 3-day guitar festival, And we'd go to my brother's house at the end of the night. One night he made us chicken cacciatore, his mom's recipe. We'd sit around the table eating, and he would tell us stories and how he went to the Guitar Center in Los Angeles. There was an amplifier he wanted, but he couldn't afford it. So he actually broke into the store, which I probably shouldn't say, but he took the amp and he hid it under he built a stage in his bedroom, hid it from his parents. So he made a compartment where he could slide it underneath the floor. And then when they weren't home, he'd take it out and practice. So with it, instead of his other amp, his cheaper amp. So yeah, just a lot of interesting stories. So that was really a fun time. And I learned a lot. And it really influenced my style of playing. And he had told me, he said, that's great, you're going to school to learn to read music, but if you want to be a side musician, learn how to read music, learn how to play all the jazz standards, and then you'll get work. But if you want to be someone separate from that, starting your own thing, kind of like what Joe Satriani did, he says, just, you can learn how to read music or not learn how to read music. He said, you have a natural talent already. I've heard the songs you've written, the way you play, you already have a natural ability. You could just explore that. And if you're not really into, because you seem to learn by ear really well and during the lessons. So I actually dropped out of college, of the music department, and stopped learning how to read music and just started playing and copying stuff off albums. So that was my lesson period, late teens into my 20s. I was playing fusion bands. We would play, Birds of Fire and Intermounting Flame and McLaughlin songs and Stanley Clarke songs off his album. And so it was a lot of fun. And then I wrote fusion songs. And there was also a time where I was in the McLaughlin, so I joined the Sri Chinmoy cult, sect, or whatever you want to call it. And I was really into the whole meditation and spiritual aspect of McLaughlin was into. So I went up to San Francisco to be initiated by the guru. And what he does is he has an orange that he touches and he kind of blesses it. And you take the orange and then you eat it. And basically, when you eat it, you're bringing all that spiritual guidance energy into your body. And he said, once we're connected as guru and disciple, it's even after his passing, we're still connected. So it was a bhakti yoga of devotion. So I would get up at 4 a.m. and meditate to his picture, and just concentrate on it. And it's a love, devotion, surrender, which was actually a Carlos Santana McLaughlin album that they did. And so when I used to go up to the Sri Chinmoy Center in San Francisco, I went up one time and they said they were going to transpose music from Sri Chinmoy, who was playing a flute in New York, and they were going to broadcast it over the phone, amplified so everyone could hear it, and they would transpose the music just from listening to it. And it just so happened Carlos Santana was there. David Pa, I think his name was David. He had a spiritual name. I can't think of it right now. Him and his wife were there. And I got to meet him and all that. So we were jamming. We played music a little bit around there. So I had my guitar, and Carlos Santana had his guitar. He had acoustic guitar, and I had acoustic, and a couple other people did, and had congas, and we would jam and play. And here I am playing with Carlos Santana and then meditating with him and his wife. And it was just like this touching another great musician, that I had known of, my whole life up to that point. So that was a really good experience too. And I was part of that for a couple of years. And then I got out of that. And then I moved to Maui in my 20s, I believe. And so I kept playing music, and I was one of 3 people running a restaurant in Maui at one point. We had a lodge and there. And one night, and we used to have live music there. So I'd still kind of been pursuing my music career and playing, but there wasn't a lot of music in Maui. So I just played a lot by myself and wrote songs and that kind of thing. So I was there for a few years, and then one of the groups that showed up was Mark Egan, who played with Pat Metheny group, and Danny Gottlieb, who was the drummer, so the bassist and drummer. And I guess Mark Egan had played. He had a Digitech um, unit that he would record bass and let it loop, and then he would play over that, and Danny would play drums to it and percussion and stuff. So that was really cool. They came to the club, but Mark Egan had forgot to pack his Digitech loop, which I think it was 1.6 a minute, 0.6, or some long duration that a lot of them didn't do in those days. But I had one. And I said, hey, I happen to have one of those. I heard him talking. I have one. I'm a guitar player. He says, oh, really? Oh, wow. That'd be great. So that night I brought my Digitech over, actually for the sound check, and they were using it. And so they played that night, and then they were going to play a couple of more nights and stay there. And they were staying at the lounge in the lodge, one of the rooms that they got to stay in. And they asked me, I was talking about music, told them a little bit that I studied with Bill Connors and played. So they told me to bring my guitar to the second show, and we could jam a little bit during the sound check. So I said, oh, it'd be great. So I came and brought my guitar, and I'm opening up the restaurant and everything. They came in, and I was the manager there. So they got up, set up, and I had my guitar out. We were jamming, for the sound check. And here I am playing with Danny Gottlieb and Mark Egan. And it was very exciting because I hadn't really been playing with anybody in Maui. So they got me all re-inspired. And so I was going to be leaving Maui, and I decided to record some songs. And I was going to take it to Los Angeles and shop it to labels. Because also they had told me, talking to Danny Gottlieb, he was telling me how McLaughlin would sit in a room for 6 or 7 hours and just play with like different tabla rhythms, and then Danny Gottlieb was kind of showing me how to do different, using the different reggaes to play on guitar, like tuckity tuckada, tuckity tuckada, dimly dimly dimly. Because I'd ask him, I go, how do you, the drums that you're doing there, like da 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 da. And he goes, well, you do the 4, but you go diggada diggada, dimly dimly diggada diggada, tuckity tuckada tuckity. So 4 tuckada tuckada, dimly dimly dimly, tuckada tuckada, diggada 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 tuckada. So I was learning that stuff from my encounter with them. So that was upping my level of playing. So I decided to record, and back in those days, you did it on reel-to-reel tape. And George Benson had a studio in Lahaina, Maui. So I went to the studio and decided to record my album there. And so here I am recording, well, not an album, but I guess you would call it an EPK back in those days, some songs, and doing different tracks on the tape. And basically it was just me. There was no drums or bass because no one was really playing fusion that was living in Maui, so this is when the Rocky movie came out and all that kind of stuff. So so I made this tape with different tracks and in George Benson's studio, and then I moved to LA and shipped my car over, Matson Cargo. And I ended up living in Venice, California. So I went to Venice. I was living a block from the beach. And I can't remember the name of the street right now, but it was like a block away. And it was during the time like Sean Penn was with Madonna, and, The Fix was really big. They just came out with that song Zero. I can't think of the name of it, but all that music was very popular right then. And Michael Jackson and the whole breakdancing thing was big, and Cyndi Lauper. And so I was in LA at that time, and that music was really big. So I went out, and so I was living there, and again, couldn't find a lot of musicians to play with, but I was there to shop the tape. So I took the reel and I went to a bunch of studios, recording studios and label offices, and took my tape in, and and they would take me into a room and they'd hook the tape up and then they would listen to it and say, yeah, it sounds good. Blah blah blah. We'll get back to you or not. It's something where it's not really a good fit for us. So I got a lot of interest in it, and I had some people at a studio would say, you can either be a sideman in a band, same as Danny Gottlieb had told me, and then eventually break away and do your own thing, or you can just kind of do something like Satriani did, just keep working on your craft and your songs and do your own thing, and be a band leader. And I always kind of was a band leader, just because I couldn't read, so I always had to kind of do everything myself, and then I had people who could read, and like always had a keyboardist that could read music, and he would tell the others what I was doing musically. So that was cool. So one day I'm at the studio and the guys listening to the tape, and I can't remember the name of the label, but they're no longer around, but they were kind of big at the time. And anyway, so he told me, and I said, yeah, I'm looking to take some lessons in the area. So I'm probably looking for somebody. He goes, well, I know this guy. His name is Jorge Struns, and he was in a band called Caldera, which your music kind of sounds like. I think you guys would probably, get along. And I'm like, oh, I never even heard of Caldera or Jorge Struns. So it turned out that I guess Jorge had already done one album with Struns. They were just starting, and they were playing at a club called Hop Sings in Santa Monica area, and that kind of thing. And they were still getting it together. So I got his phone number. I called him up. Jorge answered, and I said, yeah, I'm looking to take lessons. And we set up an appointment. I went over there. I brought my little cassette player so I could record the lesson and, listen to it and that kind of thing. So I went to his place. He was living in a little house there. We had a bunch of cats and stuff. And he told me that he was starting a band with this guy named Farah, that they had a financial backer, producer guy that was going to help them record more albums. And I guess they had been together a long time, since the 70s. And this is like early 90s, but they hadn't really done any albums yet. So until the 90s, I think. So I'm not sure on the timeline. So anyway, I brought out my acoustic guitar and I was going to take some lessons. And he goes, well, play. I told what I was doing. I was shopping some songs around and this and that, and just moved here from Maui, and the story I just told you. And he said, well, why don't you go ahead and play me a couple of your songs? Let me see where you're at musically. So I said, well, I can play you the rhythms and stuff because, that the recordings are me playing melodies and soloing over it. So I played some stuff, and he all of a sudden he starts playing with me, and I'm playing one of my songs, and here Jorge is just like ripping all over the place with his flamenco gypsy style. And it was pretty amazing. And I'm recording it because I have my cassette player on. So here I went to take lessons. I end up jamming with a guy for 3 hours, and I got it all on cassette tape. So side A, side B, I had another one, side A, side B. And towards the end, I said, yeah, I'd like to, take some lessons. And he said, yeah. I said, I'd really like to work on my right hand, my strumming hand, because his strumming was just phenomenal. So he started showing me some stuff, how to even just play percussive on the guitar and not really even having to hit a chord to make it ring, just, getting that groove. So I took some lessons from him for a while, and I'd go over and, we'd eat lunch or dinner or whatever and go back to practicing. So we kind of became friends a bit. And then, so that was another musical thing that happened. And so I lived there for a while, lived in Brentwood, worked as a waiter in a few restaurants, and, still playing my music. Not really doing any kind of a band thing yet. So I still just, trying to get my music out there. And then, so that's up to that point, the 90s, I was, trying to do what I was doing. And I ended up moving up to the Bay Area from LA, and because I had a girlfriend up there. and she had moved down to LA with me, and then she was going to school um, I think in Santa Barbara. Anyway, moved up to the Bay Area, and we ended up splitting up, and I ended up living in Walnut Creek area. And I ended up working in a restaurant called the Rusty Pelican. There was like a chain of them, and a town called San Ramon. So I'm playing there, and I met this guy Carlos, and Carlos was a kind of a Latin guy. Uh, um, it was into music big time. I think Bobby Brown was big at the time, and then those uh, that whole genre of music everybody was into. You go clubbing and listen to all that, and those two guys with the dreadlocks that were lip syncing. It was all that kind of stuff. So anyway, he introduced me to a guy named Bob Schubert, who we all became friends. We've known each other for almost 30 years now. And I was a groomsman at Bob's wedding and so on and so forth. So I ended up getting together with Bob, and we started writing songs, and we were doing more of a kind of a rock journey type music, ballad, but kind of jazzy because of my influence. And we had a band called Absolute Black, and we ended up having this guy, Chris Hawkins, I think his name was. He was our manager, and he started trying to get us gigs. And another guy was also, his partner was with him. And we ended up having a keyboardist play with us. So we got together a whole set of music. Had this really great drummer named Benny on drums. And the keyboardist was actually the nephew, because Chris Hawkins, I think his brother or his sister or aunt was Tremaine Hawkins, who wrote "Oh Happy Day," big hit back at Sony gospel type tune. Well, I think it was her son or nephew. I can't remember the family dynamics, but he was our keyboardist. So we put together a nice set, and then we ended up. He got us an audition with Starship, which was Mickey Thomas, who was a singer at the time. We built this city on rock and roll, Sarah, all those kind of tunes. So we went to an audition, and there was 3 bands that day auditioning. We were one of the 3, and the first 2 bands got up and played. And before they even finished our first song, he was like, "Okay, thank you," and they were gone. So we get up and play, and I'm thinking, "Oh, great! We bring all our gear and everything, and we're all set up." And he's just going to listen for a couple minutes and say the same thing. But it ended up, he let us play the whole song, and Bob was singing. I'm playing guitar. We had keyboards. We had another rhythm guitarist. We had a bass player named Kim. It was really good. We had a female backup vocalist. I mean, I think we had like 6 or 7 people in the band. It was crazy. And he liked the song, and he actually asked us to play another song. So we played 2 songs for Mickey Thomas at this big restaurant venue place. We were on stage, and he said, "That's great. If you guys like to open for us, we're doing like a small little tour." And I was like, "Great." So we did that stint, which was fun. And then left that band, started getting back into my own music again, and wanted to get more into the fusion music. So again, I was in sales for about 5 years, playing music on the side, not really doing a band thing. I did record an album. I left that band and recorded an album with a group. We called ourselves The Cage. And the drummer was I think, art director for CNET.com in San Francisco, and the bass player worked with them. And I went to a warehouse, Holdsworth, so no pressure, right? Big gig for me. And people were coming up and having their picture taken with us because they thought we were somebody because we're opening for, Alan Holdsworth. So that was great. And then Holdsworth, I got to meet him and hang out with them in the back room and talk and blah, blah, blah. So that was cool. And so went on with Dialogue Project for a while and did that stint. Recorded another album with dialogue project. It's called The Artistry of Jazz Fusion. And then I think the drummer was leaving, so I had to find another drummer. So I had some auditions, and I had some drummers come in. And this drummer came in, and his name was Casper, and he was from Denmark. And we started jamming, and he was great. And we were playing this other kind of music. It wasn't like, because we were just jamming. And all of a sudden, I decided I was going to disband Dialogue Project and pursue this new music I was recording, playing with this drummer and this bassist. So I had an upright bassist, and his name was Fred, local bassist, and this drummer, and we just started jamming at a recording studio where we would just rent a room. And some people heard the recording and said, you should come and play at this club. And I said, okay, but we just jam. We don't have any songs. And ended up, we started for about a year. We were just playing different clubs, and I had a business card that said, and it called ourselves the Ghost Jazz Trio. No charts, no rehearsals, no net, which meant whatever happens, happens. And we had no charts. We were just jamming. So we started doing weddings and playing clubs, and we were just going and jamming. People loved us. So that was great. I had a really good time, really got to develop my chops, and I was playing more jazzy stuff, and I was still playing my Satriani electric guitar. And then I decided I wanted to start writing songs because I was starting to write again, but I was writing from this new kind of music I was playing. And all of a sudden, the other players didn't want to play because they wanted to keep jamming. And I said, well, I'm going to be writing songs. So I had to disband that and find players that could play the songs. And that became Ghost Jazz Trio. First it was Casper and Fred, and then it was a couple other bass players and drummers. And then I was going to record an album with Ghost Jazz Trio with Casper. I was going to have Casper and a bassist play on there, but it turned out I went in to rehearse for the album to get them tightened in on the songs, and it was the Visible Time album, my first album. And I wasn't really, and I had been playing with a guy named Jack Nathan every once in a while. But Jack he had a heart attack. So he had like open hearts or chest surgery and everything. So because we were doing some shows, and because Dialogue Project did really great, but this Ghost Jazz Trio thing was just a new direction. It was more jazz. I hadn't really played that kind of stuff. So the night before I was supposed to get in recording, or the day before, a couple days before, I called up that night after rehearsing with Casper and the bassist, and I said, Jack, hey, how you doing, man? I know that you haven't been able to play. It had been a couple months. You hadn't been able to play. It was in therapy. I said, I'm going into the studio to record tomorrow, or I think it was the next day. Are you okay to play? Because I think I need someone that's a little more has a little more of a rock background to keep that bottom. Because Casper was very jazz and played outside. He was still into that jamming mindset. And for a recording, I needed to pull back on that. So he said, yeah, it's okay for me to play. I said, okay, well, let me come over tomorrow and I'll show you all the tunes, and then we'll go and record. So I went over. He hadn't even played a lot of the tunes with the bassist. And I showed him all the songs in his garage. We just went through them. Next day, we went in the studio and recorded the album in Invisible Time. And it turned out it debuted in the top 100. Like a month later, debuted on smoothjazz.com. It was in the top 100 charts, went all the way up to I think 39 in the charts. The song was Brazilian Sunset. So got a lot of play in Europe, and that was the beginning of that. So I ended up doing a personnel change for the next album, which was on the level and more smooth jazz oriented music. I was starting to listen to it more and get that feel. Again, keeping my own unique sound. And I went out and bought a Pat Metheny guitar and signature guitar. The last one in North America, they don't make it anymore. It was the last model they made. So I got the last one, and I played with it for about 3 months nonstop, just trying to get my fingers adjusted from a Satriani thin light guitar to this heavier gauge guitar, and neck and feel and everything. And so I was really struggling with that, but I spent the time in the shed doing that, every day, probably about 4 hours a day, just every day, every day, every day, because I was still working a straight job. So we did that. So we went recorded on the level. I ended up meeting Nathan Brown during the pandemic because he wasn't touring a lot, doing public shows because there was a shutdown, right? So he was working a nighttime straight job and then sleeping during the day and then kind of thing. And so he ended up doing shows. He ended up learning all of my material, and we got that sound together. And then I said, well, I want to record. So we went and recorded that on the Level album, and had Patrick Yondahl, who was my last album was nominated for Best Jazz Album of the Year, my first album. And he was in the same category. And I had just sent him a message on Facebook and said, hey, congratulations on your nomination. And we started talking. I said, it'd be great if you could play on my new album. He said, sure, send me over the tracks. So I sent the tracks over to Patrick Yondahl. And he ended up sending me the tracks back with all of his parts recorded. And then we went in, we put it all together, and that was album number 2 on the Level, which debuted in the top 100, got nominated for Best Jazz Album of the Year. And then I'm like, okay, this is working. So then I decided to record the next album the next year, which is Dreams Above. And I made that more of an ensemble. All 3 of these albums were more ensemble type albums. They didn't feature me. I wasn't in that mindset of, oh, this is, my thing. I just wanted to showcase all these talented musicians. So I did Dreams Above, featuring more sax, and I had strings come in, violins, and I didn't know how to read, so I had to conduct them and say, okay, could you do this and that, each song? And so then that album came out in 2022, again, debuted in the top 100, made it up the charts, nominated for Best Jazz Album of the Year, 2023 San Diego Music Awards. And so that was it. And then I thought, well, I was with smoothjazz.com. I had did campaigns with them since the first album, and they kind of helped me build the brand of the Ghost Jazz Trio brand to the smooth jazz audience. So I finally came to a point where I wanted to record a 4th album that would feature me, but I wanted to get a producer. So I went and talked to my recording engineer who had done the first 3 albums, Alan Sanderson, and he said, oh, well, I just happen to have a guy in here. He's really great. He produces a lot of albums, blah, blah, blah. I play with Billy Cobham. I'm like, oh, great. So contacted him. He agreed to go ahead and produce the album, Dean Brown. And his concept was to feature me as the guitarist, the natural organic sound of the guitar. Compared to the last albums, it wouldn't be so ensemble oriented. It'd be, really promoting the sound of the wood of this beautiful Pat Metheny signature guitar that I have in my style of playing. And so far, that just came out in March. It's had 2 singles, gone all the way up to 25 on the smooth jazz charts, or 24, I think, actually. And it's doing really well. So that's where I'm at now. That album is my last album I'll probably record with the Ghost Jazz Trio, unless, and then I signed with a label because of the album. They liked it, fit. So I'm with Guitar One Records. That was released on Guitar One Records, Go Records, which is had some great artists, Will Sumner on there, and Greg Howe, guitarist, he's on the label. So all this has happened really quick, since 2020. And again, due to a lot of marketing, I'm doing a lot of private shows, a lot of corporate shows, because they pay more. They don't pay like some of these local clubs pay like bands $125 for 3 hours, which is not even enough in my mind for one musician. So I do a lot of corporate work, very few public shows. I do Madame Bonnie's downtown because the owner is kind of a friend, somebody who gave me work during the end of the pandemic in 2020. So yeah, so it's been a really fun ride, and right now and I've been writing other stuff too, which is more in the fusion style. And Dean's mentioned that he had heard some of the stuff I was writing, and we talked about it. So we're going to probably do a solo album under my name. That's not going to be smooth jazz. It'll be more of this fusion sound that I like with the Pat Metheny guitar in a kind of different tones that I use, different patches. So I've already sent him some songs, and we're going to start recording that, and that should be out next year for sure. And I'll keep everyone updated on that. But that's kind of been my journey, and I know it's a long video, but I do get a lot of messages. People want to know where I came from, what I've been doing, and I think I have a unique story. It's very interesting. I've met a lot of different people along the way. Carlos Santana, Alan Holdsworth, Bill Connors, Dean Brown, and then I've met Al Di Meola back in the day when he played in Santa Cruz. I ended up going to their hotel room with Stanley was there, and Lenny White. Di Meola partied with them at the hotel after one of their shows, and I actually talked to Al about it once on Facebook, how when Chick came into the room to say he was going up to San Francisco for the next show, Al Di Meola was out on the deck drinking a beer. And I guess Scientology, they're not supposed to be drugs and beer and all that. So he threw the beer off the balcony into the swimming pool below at the hotel because he didn't want Chick to see him with a beer in his hand. So that was kind of interesting. And then Stanley sitting on the bed, and we're talking about Dianetics, L. Ron Hubbard, that kind of thing. And so I've had a lot of, interaction along the way with inspirational musicians, and it's been a fun journey. This last album is one of my favorite albums to listen to. It's just, I love all the compositions. Dean did a great job, capturing my sound and the sound of these musicians I play with that are all really great musicians to play with. So if you're ever in San Diego, or if you're in San Diego, you can catch some of our rare public shows. We'll be playing June 23rd and June 30th, 2023 at Madame Bonnie's at 4th and Market, downtown San Diego from 7 to 9 if you want to come on down. Sometimes Chase Pato plays with us there. He just did the last show on the 11th of May. Sometimes he's not there because, they're all working musicians. So the Ghost Jazz Trio brand is doing really well. And again, I'm trying to expand the brand. I think I've gone as far as I can with the smooth jazz demographic and the smooth jazz radio. So I'm talking to a marketing outfit out of Chicago about expanding into a younger crowd through social media, TikTok and Instagram and bloggers and influencers and other podcasters that are involved in the music to a younger audience. Because when people hear smooth jazz, they think of older, Tommy Bahama shirts hanging out, whatever. And this music deserves to have a younger audience hear it, because I've been getting a lot of contact from people in their 30s, even their 20s, telling me they really like the music. So I'm trying to find ways to expand it online to those people. So hopefully, it'll help the brand. And all this to me is just to help me as a musician get more work. Being popular and having awards and all that, it doesn't really mean anything to me personally. It's not what I do it for, but it's nice to have those accolades because it gives you credibility. So when you do want to get work, you have that. I've told people I don't consider myself the greatest guitar player or the greatest composer or performer, but what I do works and people like it, and I'll just keep doing and trying to hone my skills and perfect what I'm doing now that I know I have my own voice musically, which is the hardest thing for, I think, a musician to find is their own voice in music. And I have that. The one thing I've learned too is when you have people around you, some people support you and some don't. When you're not really doing anything, out there, everyone loves your music. Oh, you should play. What are you doing? Then when you start getting popular, I don't know what it is, but people kind of resent the fact that you're getting popular. For instance, in the music community in San Diego, you know, um, again, Ghost Jazz Trio has been nominated for 3 awards. We're in the charts. We're the only charting band in San Diego. And there's no acknowledgement from the jazz community or the people that report on the jazz community for the Ghost Jazz Trio. It's almost like, these guys came out of nowhere. They don't deserve to, you know, we're popular for a reason. We're nominated for a reason. The brand is nominated for a reason. It's because the music's good and the work has been put in to get the band, you know, uh, to where it's notoriety. People know who the Ghost Jazz Trio is. So it just kind of it's interesting to me that you build a brand and then some of the local community and musicians, even musicians I've played with, they kind of they're jealous in a way or resent you because of your success. And it's not even success, it's just being known. And I mean, isn't that, to me, it's like every musician should be supportive of another musician if they're being successful. And, I mean, I signed with a label, I come out with new albums, and I've had friends and other musicians, they don't even call you to say, hey, congratulations, or that's great, or, it's almost like they resent the fact that you did it. So, there's that too, but you can't care about any of that. Yes, for those of you who are out there doing your own thing, just do what you do. It's not about pleasing other people. It's about staying true to yourself and pursuing your art and expressing yourself and getting it out the way that you want to get it out there. And that's what I've done, and I'll continue to do. And those of you that want to follow us on social media, Ghost Jazz Trio on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, subscribe to the YouTube channel for other updates and postings, and go to the ghostjazztrioband.com. You can see our performance schedule, and you can find the albums there if you want to download them, and you can stream them on all your favorite music platforms. So it's good music, and I hope everyone enjoys it. And I hope if you found the video interesting, let me know. I just want to give everybody a background about where I've been and how I got here. And I hope that answers a lot of questions. I hope everyone has a great Mother's Day. All right, thanks. Bye.